this chart. Next slide. Our mission at the California Water Boards is to protect and restore groundwater and surface water quality. And by doing so, we are protecting the public's health and the environment. Our region oversees more than 10 million residents, and our office covers one of the most populous of the 9 water board regions. It encompasses the 9 coastal watersheds within Los Angeles and Ventura counties, as shown here. It also encompasses 24 groundwater basins covering 1,580 square miles of surface water. Next slide. The regional water boards have statutory responsibility to protect water of California and preserve all present and future beneficial uses of those waters. On this slide, you can see the legal authorities which give us a delegated authority to protect the waters of the state and waters of the U.S. These waters are the property of the people, and our job is to protect the waters for all people. Next slide. So now moving on to what we oversee, and the best way to explain this and the easiest way to break it down is we are broken down into 2 divisions. One is the surface water division and the other is the groundwater division. I'll first discuss a little bit about the surface water division and then into the groundwater division. So between those 2 divisions, there's 6 programs. And over the next 2 slides, I'll be discussing the programs. But I think it's really important to give you a really high-level overview as far as what we do, so that you can better grasp our responsibilities. So in the future, if you ever need us, you know exactly where to go. So surface water division can be a bit confusing because it also contains programs such as groundwater. Hopefully, after these slides, you'll be able to better understand why. The best way to describe surface water division is they assess water quality, they develop plans to preserve and restore water quality, and issue permits to implement these plans. The regional program section assesses surface water by working with impaired bodies of water in our region. They also develop pollution reduction plans and look at the water basin. And they set standards and beneficial uses for the region. Some significant permits are municipal stormwater and irrigated agricultural lands. The watershed regulatory section issues and renews permits more specifically to those industries or municipalities that discharge wastewater to surface water, such as a river or an ocean or a stream. This section also issues permits for recycled water projects, which you've heard a lot about in the news recently. And finally, the groundwater permitting and land disposal section. They issue similar permits to the ones I just mentioned, but more specifically for facilities that discharge only to land and groundwater. These facilities can include landfills, municipal wastewater facilities, septic systems, sites that inject material or re-inject groundwater as part of a groundwater remediation project, and miscellaneous facilities that discharge waste that can impact our groundwater quality. Next slide, please. And next, we're going to move on to the groundwater division, which is the most pertinent for this meeting tonight. All 3 sections of the groundwater division have a role in protecting the beneficial uses of groundwater, public health, and the environment in our region. The remediation section, or the site cleanup program, is the staff that is here today, and they fall under this section. They regulate and oversee the investigation and cleanup of sites where unauthorized releases of pollutants to the environment, including soil, groundwater, surface water, and sediment have occurred. Then we have the underground storage tank section and oil and gas program, and they work on pollution caused by releases of petroleum and other hazardous substances from underground storage tanks, USTs. And lastly, but not least, we have our compliance and enforcement section. They ensure compliance with orders and permits that I just mentioned above. I really would like to encourage you to go to our website and get familiar with all the programs that we oversee. As you can see, it is a huge undertaking, and we currently have 178 staff. This includes engineers, geologists, scientists, and administrative staff. Now I'm going to pass this on to Dr. Jeff Thompson, who's going to give you an update on the former Pacific Electric Board case. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you very much, Susanna. My name is Jeff Thompson. I'm an engineering geologist with the LA Water Board Site Cleanup Program. I'm the case manager for the Pacific Electric Cord case. And what that means is I provide technical reviews on site reports and other documents. I provide recommendation to water board management regarding the requirements of the case. And I act as one of the primary points of contact should there be questions that come up related to the site. Before we get into the history and details of the site itself, we did want to answer the question, what the sources of Harbor Gateway North's drinking water are. So in preparing for this meeting, we spoke with LADWP and we did confirm that the groundwater in the vicinity of the site is not used for drinking water. The sources of the water that's supplied to Harbor Gateway North are what's called imported waters. And those come from one of three different water projects, either the California Aqueduct, coming from Central California, the Los Angeles Aqueduct coming from the Sierra Nevada mountains, or the Colorado River Aqueduct that brings water from the Colorado River. So I think what's important is you'll hear us talk about remediation and contamination in groundwater near the former Pacific Electric Cord site. What we're really looking at there is to restore the groundwater quality and protect the future potential use for that water so it acts as a resource for drinking water going forward. So we just wanted to start to make it clear that there's not a drinking water concern today associated with this site. So moving on to the case itself, I'm going to give a brief overview of the history of the site and the case, and then we'll wrap up with the status and the plan for cleanup. So this is a map showing the location and a historical aerial photo of the former Pacific Electric Cord site. It's located on Redondo Beach Boulevard along the southern edge of the District 3 of Harbor Gateway North. Based on historical records, the site was used by the Pacific Electric Cord Company from around 1961 to 2004 to manufacture electrical extension cords. In the early 2000s, the site was sold to a redevelopment entity called APA3 for potential redevelopment. In or around 2006, APA3 sold the site to another redevelopment entity, kind of a long name, Redondo Beach Boulevard 110 Freeway LA Partnership. That entity is the current site owner. This Redondo Beach Boulevard 110 LA Freeway Partnership in around 2011 conducted the work to demolish most of the structures and basically down to their concrete slabs. And that's the sort of condition of the site today, is that it's a vacant site with the bottom building slabs remaining. And as you're probably aware, Prologis is currently in planning stage for redeveloping the site as a warehouse and distribution center, along with the neighboring property to the west. That would be done as a tenant under this Redondo Beach Boulevard 110 Freeway LA Partnership retaining ownership of the site, based on our current understanding of the development plans. With respect to the water board, we became involved in the case in around 2006. The water board was provided reports from one of the redevelopment contractors identifying the presence of contamination in soils on the site, as well as in groundwater beneath the site. In response to that report, the water board issued what's called a California Water Code 13267 order, or an order to investigate the site. That order was issued to APA3 as the responsible party, and they're the current entity continuing to perform work associated with the water board case. This is going to be a brief overview. The full history of the case and the associated documents are publicly available. You can visit the GeoTracker website and search for this case. On there, our correspondence and the reports are available for public viewing. Certainly, if you have any, if you have trouble finding that, just let me know. We'll have contact information at the end of this presentation. I'm happy to assist with that. So following that investigation order from around 2006 to 2015, additional site investigations were conducted on and off-site in a phased approach. This is typical for environmental projects where you use the data from one investigation to inform the need whether there's additional investigations as you go. In 2015, the LA Water Board determined that there was sufficient data to request what's called a remedial action plan. What a remedial action plan is, it's a document where the scientists and engineers involved on the project will review different remedial strategies and approaches, develop an evaluation of the pros and cons, and provide a recommendation to the LA Water Board for a request to approve the approach that they believe is most effective in addressing the site contamination. That RAP went through several rounds of review, but in 2016, it was sort of the final revision was sent to the water board, and it recommended for groundwater a passive remedial approach called monitored natural attenuation, where essentially the groundwater plume is allowed to degrade under natural processes such as biodegradation from bacteria within the groundwater, with monitoring and sample collection performed to make sure that the degradation is occurring as expected. Because of the passive nature of that remediation versus, say, an active remedy where you go in and either remove or actively break down a contaminant, the Water Board requested that additional data be collected to basically do an extra round of analysis to confirm that that natural attenuation is appropriate as the remedial action. That work continued from around 2016 up through last year, 2023. And then based on what we saw, we kind of hit a milestone in November of 2023. We did find that based on the data that's been collected since 2016, when that remedial action plan was put together, the degradation of contaminants in groundwater has not been progressing at the rates that were initially projected. So we've determined that additional work is necessary to address the site and to clean up the site. And we'll talk about what that looks like as we go through this presentation. So for the current site conditions, there have been two what we call source areas that are identified. These are locations of the site where contaminant or contaminant-containing materials were actually released or discharged. One being a former emulsion tank, which was used to collect process wastes and other fluids. So in this instance, it would be a leak in the tank, causing that material to basically land on the soil and then infiltrate into the soil, eventually working its way down to groundwater. Another source area is a portion of the former rail spur. There was a rail siding that came down along the west side of the site. This is an area where there was elevated petroleum and heavy metals in shallow soil were identified during site investigation. In 2005, soil excavation was performed in these two areas as a remedial action, with the idea of being to physically remove the contaminated material, dispose of it offsite, and then fill those areas in with clean backfill imported soil. From these investigation activities, there's three main categories of contaminants that are associated with the site. I mentioned petroleum and heavy metals a little bit ago. The primary and really driver of the cleanup are a type of compound called chlorinated solvents. The specific chemical that's the primary one that's been identified is a chemical called tetrachloroethylene, sometimes called PCE or PERC. That's a material that was used as an industrial cleaner and degreaser, amongst other uses. There are some other associated chlorinated compounds as well. It's not only PCE that's driving the cleanup. And these compounds have been identified in soils on the site in what's called soil vapor. These are volatile compounds, so they can enter the air, and so they're present within the air found within the soil. And they are identified in groundwater beneath the site and extending off-site. Just to give a sense of where some of these contaminants have been identified at the site, the soil impacts are primarily located on the western portion of the site. It's the specific building was called Plant 3. This is where most of the manufacturing operations, like the extruding and the wire coating type operations, were performed. And then with soil vapor, these volatile compounds do tend to be mobile within the subsurface, and essentially they've been identified at the site wherever there's been a sample collected. They are ubiquitous at the site. Now, the concentrations do vary, and the highest concentrations are generally found in that same Plant 3 area on the western portion of the site. Moving on to groundwater. Groundwater is found about 30 to 35 feet below the ground surface. Up at the site, it's around 30 feet. As you move to the southeast offsite, it's a little bit deeper. It's around 35 feet. From the data that's been collected, the groundwater flow direction is very consistent towards the southeast. And as I mentioned, chlorinated solvent contamination has migrated that 30 to 35 feet through the subsurface and intersected groundwater. And what happens when contaminants enter groundwater is they can migrate in the direction of flow, and they form what we call a contaminant plume. So the map shows the approximate extent or the footprint of where chlorinated solvents have been identified within groundwater. And this is based on data that's collected by the responsible party twice a year. And so in brief, what they do is they hire a specialized subcontractor who has sampling equipment, typically like a pickup or truck mounted sampling rig. They drive out to each of these wells. They'll collect samples via pump, send those water samples to an analytical lab, who then process those samples and return concentration data, a measurement of the amount of different chemicals within those waters, including these chlorinated solvents. That data is summarized and sent to the water board in a groundwater monitoring report. And that's done twice a year. Every January and July are when those reports are due. So every January, every July, we get an update on the site conditions within groundwater. So moving on just to the last section of the presentation is what's the status of cleanup and what's the plan moving forward. So as I mentioned earlier, we have determined that passive remediation has not fully reduced the concentrations of contaminants within groundwater to the levels that we need them to get to. The 2016 Groundwater Remedial Action Plan used modeling to come up with an estimate of how long the predictions were for those concentrations to drop to below the California maximum contaminant levels. There's a graphic here for one of the wells. In brief, the model projection is that line, and that was based on the gray data, so the data that was collected before 2016. And if this natural attenuation had progressed at the rates that were projected, the blue data points, the new data, should fall along that line. But what we've seen at this well and at other wells associated with the site is that the concentrations have remained approximately the same, and in some cases maybe slightly higher than they were historically. So what that tells us is that passive remediation, allowing the system to clean itself up, is not going to get groundwater cleaned up to the levels that we need them to get to. That does work for some sites. It's a valid method, but in this case, the natural system just isn't going to do it. And what that data suggests to us is that there's still contaminant mass at the site that's essentially recharging the groundwater plume. So there needs to be site remediation to reduce those concentrations so that the groundwater plume either will clean itself up or active remediation be performed on groundwater to facilitate the cleanup of the plume. And so the plan moving forward is essentially a three-step plan in kind of the high-level summary. Because of a result where projections were not met, we do need to do some additional investigation or have additional investigation performed. One is to make sure that, given the duration that this project has been going on, to make sure there aren't any potential health risks that haven't been evaluated in previous reports. So we want to make sure there's not a health risk based on the site data that we have. And additional data collection will facilitate that evaluation. And in addition, collecting additional data to define what we call the extent of the contamination, where it is and at what levels. Because there seems to be source mass that's recharging this groundwater plume that's not been previously identified, this does suggest that the understanding of the site is not complete at this point. So more data is necessary to inform our understanding of the site and the associated contamination. In tandem with that, we do know where some of the source areas were located, and we can do and plan to require what's called interim remedial action or interim mitigation measures. So if there's a health concern that's been identified, we would do mitigation measures. That would be steps to reduce potential exposure. And then remediation would be to target the source areas where we expect concentrations to be highest and the largest amount of contaminant mass to be located, and do a focused and expedited remediation on those areas to reduce that high concentration source area while the additional investigations are going. So parallel approach. And then as a final step, it would be the final remedial action, and that would have the goal to restore groundwater quality and return that groundwater to beneficial use. Now, I will say the specific timing of the investigations and cleanup plans are currently under review. In November, we did issue a comprehensive set of requirements for work plans from the responsible party. That would be essentially their plan to complete these specific actions. Consistent with typical turnaround times, we had provided, depending on the specific document, 60 to 90 days to complete those. The discharger has asked for additional time to complete those documents, and we're currently in the process of reviewing and considering that request for additional time. In addition, we do have a line of communication with Prologis that's been established, and they understand that as part of the redevelopment, as if they produce plans associated with environmental issues, such as a soil management plan or a vapor intrusion mitigation system design, those will need to be sent to the LA Water Board for our review to make sure that the plans that they have in place are appropriate and protective given our understanding of the site conditions. And with that, I'll just end this. Here's our contact information for all of our attendees today. We are happy to talk to you anytime. Please feel free to contact us, and I'll break here and ask if there are any questions.
Go ahead, Rosalie.
So last year, when our chair of the neighborhood council, Miguel Vasquez, and I met with you and some others from the water board at a virtual meeting, you mentioned, I believe could you review how many groundwater monitoring wells there are, and how, because the contamination is moving to the southeast, that 2 new groundwater monitoring wells were installed last year, and one of them is next to Farmer Boys, and one is in the what we know as our District 2 area.
Yeah, thank you. You're correct. The number of wells that are associated with the site, there's 8 wells, with 4 of those wells being a single well, essentially a single, well, they're PVC, so PVC tube. Uh, the other 4 are what we call cluster wells, where there's multiple PVC tubes installed at different depths. So there's, I think the easiest way to say is there's 8 wells, but some of those wells may sample multiple intervals. On this map, and let me see if I can get a pointer, which I think I know how to do. This well, PEMW8, this is one of those cluster wells. So there's a well A, B, C, and D. This is located next to the Farmer's Boy. That's this location there, if you're able to see the screen. The other well that was installed, oops, pardon me, I've got to move everyone's pictures, is this well MW7, located just to the west of the site boundary. These were the 2 wells that were installed in 2023.
Oh, I thought the one along the freeway was the second one.
This well was installed, and I apologize, I don't have the exact date in front of me, but it's somewhere in the around 2014. So this
Okay.
well's been monitored since that time. And one of our, if you're looking carefully, you'll notice that the plume edge is dashed. What that means is we don't know for certain what that extent is, because this well is the furthest away from the site that's been installed. One of the water board requirements is for a work plan for additional what we call delineation, essentially additional investigation to the southeast to determine how far the groundwater contamination extends away from the site.
I believe Micah has a question.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. My question is about, in a more pedestrian way, the types of chemicals that you're describing that are, both kind of like leaching into the soil and like recharging this groundwater contamination plume. Is the concern for public health in this case that these materials could be like dug up and put into the air on a construction site? Are they things that kind of find their way into people's houses, on their shoes, like lead dust historically has? And sort of just, can you give us a sense of what is, I understand that our ground, the water that comes out of our tap in this area has nothing to do with what we're discussing. But what are the kind of like local health concerns, beyond just environmental concern for leaving the earth toxic?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start, and then if any of my colleagues want to supplement, I think what the sort of scientific term we'd use for what you're asking for, what are sort of the exposure pathways? How could an individual potentially come into contact with these chemicals? So there's a couple of different routes that we would look at, and we do what's called a risk assessment to evaluate those. For groundwater, certainly if someone were to pump that water and say bathe with it or drink it, we would have a concern. That's not the case in this circumstance as we discussed, but that would be one exposure pathway. With these volatile compounds, as I mentioned, they do move through the subsurface. They can get into the air. So one of the concerns would be whether they are migrating offsite or potentially even from the groundwater moving into soil air within the subsurface and then migrating upwards. So part of the requirements that we've issued in November are to do an additional degree of characterization on site of the soil vapor, but also to extend that investigation offsite to look at the concentrations to see if there are any of these compounds that are moving out of groundwater into soil, and if so, is that a concern? So that is one of the kind of front end action items moving forward. With respect to the site itself, because groundwater is at 30 feet, that say for the current redevelopment plan, there aren't any underground structures to our knowledge. So we're not really looking at a direct exposure, say a construction worker coming into contact with groundwater, but we would be concerned about whether there are residual contaminants in soil, and then certainly that soil vapor during construction and then post-construction, once there's if there are people working on that site and there's contaminant left in place. So with that I had mentioned, we've established with Prologis that they need to send us a soil management plan. What that document is that is the plan in place prior to a redevelopment or prior to moving soil to protect the site workers from potentially encountering contaminations. That would be monitoring requirements, personal protective equipment requirements, procedures in place if contamination is identified at a high concentration unexpectedly, things of that nature. And then a vapor intrusion mitigation system, that's an integrated component of a building design that is tailored either as a barrier or there are different systems that can be put in place, either active or passive, that prevent contaminant in the soil from working their way through the air into an indoor space. So for a new building, when there's, that can be integrated into the construction design as a component as the construction's moving forward.
Isha, you have a question? Your hand's up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just a quick follow-up is just whether these requirements for Prologis to define a plan, are these independent of the EIR that needs to be approved, or is it somehow connected to that same process?
Yeah, so the EIR is with LA City Planning. So this is separate. This is under the water boards, essentially because it is a contaminated site. It's part of our responsibility to protect human health is the basis for requiring these documents be provided to us. And part of that is that we've been working on this site for, going on 18 years. We have a good degree of familiarity with the specifics of the contamination. So we're in the best position to provide a high level of detailed review of those documents to really make sure that they align with the needs of the site.
Question, would you agree that that whole site would need to be completely cleaned before anything is built there?
So I think the short answer is no. Redevelopment of contaminated sites is done in tandem with mitigation measures or site remediation. So there's not a requirement to completely clean a site before a developer can do anything with it. Now, there are added complications and extra care needs to be taken when there is development on a contaminated site, but it doesn't require cleanup prior to beginning the planning process and beginning the implementation.
Jeffrey, this is Hugh Morley. I just want to add though, but it will need to be cleaned up to our standards that fully protect water quality and human health before we will close the site. So
Correct.
they can proceed in parallel with development using mitigation measures in place that will protect the occupants of the building and the environment. But our cleanup of soil vapor, and groundwater continues, and they do not get a closure until we are satisfied. Thank you.
So per se, if a development started and they were into it, who would be the watchdog to make sure that we are protected? Would that be you? As far as the groundwater, the contaminants, etc.
I think we would be one of multiple agencies. Yeah, there's different sort of realms of responsibility in a construction development project involving soil movement. Almost certainly the air quality management district would be involved. There'd be permitting, and each agency involved in the permitting process would have their own, say, site inspectors or oversight. So we're part of that, but we're not the only agency or entity that would be part of that process to make sure that the community is protected.
Are there any other questions? Go ahead, Rosalie.
I believe from the reports you sent us late last year that it indicated with the groundwater monitoring wells that 2 of them aren't as needed now, and that Prologis had asked if they could be closed or moved because it, based on their proposed new construction, if, you know, once that receives final approval,
Mhm.
that there were 2 monitoring wells that kind of interfered with what they were planning to build there. Is that
Yeah.
accurate?
That's correct. Yeah, I've got the map up, so I'll point to them. The 2 specific wells in question is this PEMW2, and then this well PEMW5. And the basis for the request for approval to abandon those wells are a little bit different for each well. The MW2 is located kind of in the center of the proposed building. So with the implementation of a vapor mitigation system, part of the design is to have as few, I guess, connections or potential connections between the ground and inside the building. So the request to abandon that well is essentially so that there's not a pipe that goes from the ground and potentially as a conduit for vapors to move into that building once it's constructed. For PMW5, its location is within a driving space or green space in the design. It varies a little bit based on which version you look at. But there's a practical constraint that well's installed on one of these concrete slabs, and they're about 2 to 3 feet above the ground. So part of the development plan is to demolish and grade, basically flatten out those features so that the site is level and there aren't these raised building slabs. Because of that, the nature of how that well's installed, it's very difficult to guarantee that well could be protected during that demolition. So the request was if they could abandon that well so that it would facilitate removal of the slab. Now, our response back to those requests were, if you need to do that for redevelopment, you can, but you need to give us a plan to replace those. You can't just get rid of them. You need to do something to, the data from those wells is still important. We'll work through the development so that, that can move forward, if only that, so that these wells aren't the only sort of sticking point, but we still need that data. And we've asked for a work plan to describe, what that replacement plan would be.
Are there any other questions? Go ahead, Rosalie.
So on the southeastmost portion of the contamination plume, you mentioned that it's dashed because it isn't quite known how much further it extends. So is that, so when this contamination was first reported to you and the water board began their investigation and oversight, is there something in the law that delineates how far that the studies have to go? Because, I mean, we're kind of concerned here looking at this map
Mhm.
that it's right under some of the residences in our District 2 area. And we're wondering if it actually could extend, you know, a little bit further south, and then is it flowing even like under the freeway and into the next residential area on the east side of the freeway?
Yeah. So, to the question, is there, like a statutory limit? And the answer is no. The requirement to delineate is however far it goes. That could be, a few hundred feet in some cases. It could be miles in others. Our charge is to protect groundwater, and there's not it's as far as that plume goes is how far we will expect it to be monitored and delineated.
Yeah, and Rosalie, I just wanted to add to what Jeff indicated is essentially the plume needs to be delineated to background. And so as Jeff indicated, we have issued a requirement for the responsible party to further delineate the groundwater plume. And we do have the authority under one of the water codes that and how a resolution that Susanna shared in her earlier presentation, where we can require the responsible party to complete delineation or fully assess the extent of the soil vapor and groundwater plume.
And this is Hugh, and that is exactly what Jeff is requiring. We're going to find the extent of the plume down to what Gillian referred to and Jeff referred to as background, which is basically where it doesn't exist anymore, where the concentration is zero, or whatever the concentration in the surrounding natural groundwater is. So Jeff will continue to get the discharger to define not just the edge of the plume to the bottom of the page you're looking at, but also the vertical extent of the plume. While at the same time, he's going to be looking at the effects in not just groundwater, but off-gassing into soil, and the potential for off-gassing into maybe the residences, because our it's not just groundwater. We're also looking at protection of human health and the environment. So we understand your concern, and we are concerned too, and we will be chasing down the extent and getting as much data and getting as much information to button down the size and extent of this plume and get it remediated.
So that would come in a future report, possibly.
He's asking for it now. Jeff, what?
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
So, so what we've asked for is a plan to tell us how that data, what data is going to be collected and what methods are going to be used, how many locations, where those are going to be. That plan was originally due in January. They've requested an extension to the end of March to prepare that. As I said, we're considering whether that is acceptable, whether we want to agree with that. But when we get that plan, what we'll look at is to say, is that proposal going to answer the question? Is there a reasonable chance that that's going to actually delineate the plume? Is it a robust investigation? We'll either agree with that plan and approve it. We may say it's most of the way there, but we need a couple of conditions. Maybe you need a minor adjustment to the scope of that plan, so we'll conditionally approve. Or if that plan is insufficient, we will reject that plan and require that they prepare a plan that is sufficient. Then, of course, once we approve the plan, we will set an appropriate deadline for them to go out, do the work, collect the data, and report it.
And it is an iterative process. It's very rare that you would go out and put in wells and fully delineate the size of the plume on right away. So what Jeff is probably going to be looking at is putting in wells, getting data, and reviewing the data and going, yeah, I'm not happy. We need some more information here, here, and here, and going back and having them do more work until he's happy with until he's got the plume delineated fully. So it is likely an iterative process as it has been to date. And Jeff, you might want to also share, you've already did, this information, the work plans, the data, the reports, that it is all available to the group, to the public, and where they can find it, if you don't mind.
Yeah, certainly. So we use a system called GeoTracker, GEO Tracker, TRACKER. I think I got that right. It's an online website, and that's our repository for essentially all of our cleanup sites and the associated documents. So within that, you just search Pacific Electric Cord. You could search the site address, 747 West Redondo Beach Boulevard, and you would be directed to the page that's specifically set up for this site. And that's got copies of the reports that you can download. They're typically in PDF format. There's a summary of the data. We provide a summary of the project and the status. So there's information. The idea behind GeoTracker is that the public has the ability and the right to know about the contamination and cleanup ongoing within their neighborhoods. And so that's the tool the water board uses to essentially make our files accessible to whomever has an internet connection.
Yeah, and I was just about to volunteer Jeff to provide you with that link, but I see that somebody has put that in the chat already.
Thank you.
Yeah, Josh placed the link to the chat for the GeoTracker case file for the site. Thank you, Josh.
But I am going to offer Jeff up for questions when you access these reports.
Yeah.
We're all always available to go over them with you. They're not always something that's readily understood by the public. I am not an engineer or a geologist. I do not understand them that well without help and from my colleagues. So don't hesitate to, you pull up something, don't try to break your head over it or, become concerned because something stands out, call and let us talk it over with you.
And when we do get to the point where we have what's called a remediation action plan, or a RAP, to use acronyms, and that is the plan to clean up the site, Jeff will, with Susanna's help, we will make that information available to everyone in the community within 500 feet of the edge of the contamination, and all other interested parties, and seek your comments on the plan, and talk to you and incorporate your comments before we proceed.
Before we let you go, just one quick question. Will the development plan of Pelotas be on GeoTracker as well?
That is the development plan, and the proposed development. That's a planning department issue, and we have nothing to do with that really. We're here for the cleanup of soil vapor, groundwater, protection of human health and the environment. We do not have any. We do coordinate. We try to coordinate. We have reached out to the planning folks, and we try and work in parallel, hand in hand with them, so that we both know what each other are doing, and we're looking out for each other's. We're not going to be stepping on each other's toes, but they're separate. What the planning folks do with the ultimate reuse, whether it's apartments or residences or industrial warehouses, that's not up to us. We have no say in that.
Go ahead, Rosalie.
So Jeffrey, could you just clarify that the responsible party, which is APA 3, that they then are the ones who hire the company that monitors the wells and is also coming up with the plan for cleanup?
That's correct. Yeah, so APA 3 is the responsible party, and they've hired a consulting firm. It's been a long-lasting relationship they've had. They've had the same consultant for the duration. That consultant may hire their own subcontractors to work with them, but it all flows back to APA 3 as the responsible party, being the one who is funding and leading that work. We provide the oversight and the review, and we establish the requirements, and then the responsible party, they're responsible to do the work.
Go ahead, Lou.
Thank you for that. I was just gonna ask if the water board was gonna oversee or look at this report that's coming from Pelogis on its own as an independent agency, or it was just gonna take the results that you receive. Because we have concern with that. We need to be reassured that the water board is going to look at whatever this report is on independently and not just take the results that are coming from this Pelogis's party.
Yeah.
Am I correct?
That's a very good point. Yes, we do have several requirements as to who prepares the reports, what their certification, what their qualifications are, what lab the data goes through, the samples go to, and the qualifications of the lab, and we have. There's a lot of parameters that have to be met before a report is submitted and it is reviewed. Those criteria are all looked at. Jeffrey and Joshua, if you want to talk more about what goes into the report and what's needed. And no, we don't just leave it up to them. We have over here, we have Dr. Jeffrey Thompson, who is a geologist who's very skilled at looking through these things and knows what he's looking for. So we do our own independent review, analysis, and response to these documents. So Jeffrey and others, if you want to chime in, please do.
Certainly. Thank you. Thank you, Hugh. I'll take the compliment, but it is truly an independent review. We will look at the document that's been provided. What we're anticipating is 2 documents, a soil management plan. I mentioned briefly that'll be the procedures and the approach that will be used during excavation and grading, other soil moving activities, to make sure that site workers, and I should say not just site workers, but also members of the public, are protected during that. We will look at what's proposed, whether those plans are consistent given the levels of contamination that we've seen, to make sure that that those exposure pathways are being accounted for and appropriately addressed. And if we need additional support on if they're doing risk calculations, we do have support from one of our sister agencies, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, OEHA. They have toxicologists on staff that are able to provide a top-notch scientific review of toxicological and risk-related data. So we have them to support. As you mentioned, I'm a geologist, I'm not a toxicologist, so I've turned to them on numerous projects for support, looking at risk calculations, assumptions, making sure that those are consistent with the state of the science and are protective. The other document that we're anticipating is their plan for vapor intrusion mitigation. That would be an engineering-oriented document that would outline the approach that would be used on the site once, for essentially separating the new construction, the warehouse or the logistics center from the contamination within soil vapor. So that's going to be focused primarily on on-site exposure pathways, not so much exposure pathways offsite, but we also will be reviewing that to make sure that the procedures, the building materials, what they're using are consistent and protective given the concentrations that we know are present on site.
And that information will be on GeoTracker.
I do anticipate that for the documents that are sent to us for review, those will be publicly available, and I would say 99% sure we're going to put those up on GeoTracker.
Yeah, definitely. They submit those documents through the GeoTracker database to us, and that's how
Yeah.
we get them. And then we respond via GeoTracker.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jess. So 100%.
Are there any other questions? Well, we'd like to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your awesome presentation. It was really informative, and we will definitely be calling you back when we have more questions or need more answers. And I thank you again, and you guys have a wonderful evening.
You
Thank
too.
you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening.
Good night.
You as well.
Good night.
Night.
Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda, item number 5, reports on other planning and land use issues. The status on the Arco gas station at 854 West El Segundo Boulevard.
There's
Rosalie
still,
said,
yeah, there's still no
um,
further update.
the email didn't that I received said around May. Did you get that one?
No, that one is related to the Weingart Willows.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
okay.
the
Well, go
Arco
ahead and move
station.
on to B and go ahead and give an update on Weingart.
So we did email the presenters from the Weingart. And they responded that, because originally they told us they would be starting to outreach for residents, I believe last November, something like that, and that people might start moving in January, but now their projected opening date is mid-April, early May. The application process would be through the coordinated entry system of LASA, which is with Harbor Interfaith, and it would open in March. So we'll try to follow up closer to March to see if there's some kind of announcement that we can make so that people in our, in our area are aware of those openings. I drove past last night during the homeless count,
Mm-hmm.
and it looked like they were working on the exterior of the entrance area. So I guess maybe they started with the individual units and upgrading them to, to be the apartments, but.
Go ahead, Lou.
I'm not familiar with Weingart Willows. Where is it located? I'm not quite sure if I'm thinking of the right location.
It's the former Sea Rock Inn, just
okay.
south of 140th Street on Vermont.
Okay, I'm okay. I understand.
Okay, moving on to the next item, item C, impact of oil drilling from the Gardner J1 well, 809 West 126th Street. If anyone has seen the pictures like I have, that sharing. Um,
Oh, Keith, I think you were looking at the
were those
older
old?
version of our agenda because,
Uh,
yeah, well, after we finish this, we need to go back because it's the Harbor Gateway Community Plan update. So,
Okay.
yeah, the oil drilling, we continue to get reports from one of the residents in the 700 block of 129th who's had the most impact to her home from the drilling, which we believe is slant drilling going south from 126th Street. But I did have a chance to take some of the informational flyers and a copy of the council file that our council member McCosker introduced along the 700 block of 129th Street, and particularly on the north side. There's a number of other houses that are having impacts. You could see structural cracking of the exterior of their stucco along the foundation area. And one woman has a tile floor in her kitchen, and the archway going into the laundry area. There are cracks that look like they've been caused by, vibration of the home from deep underground. So we're continuing to monitor. We're just trying to figure out if there's a way before the council file finally gets passed. It's been held up. It was going to have a hearing in the City Council's Planning and Land Use Management Committee, known as the Plum Committee. And some of us were going down to be at that meeting, but that whole committee meeting got canceled. So we're not sure if it's going back on the agenda. It sounds like some of the city staffers are kind of pushing back on the support for that council file. So we have to monitor that too. And it would be helpful if we could figure out a way to monitor or measure if there's any methane and other gases coming up in people's homes along that block. More than 10 years ago, when we first had impact from the Garner well being re-drilled and fracked, there was someone from a group in Culver City that did methane monitoring and created a map. So we need to try to figure out how to do that again.
how would we pay for that? Would it go through the city?
Well, there might
Request?
be some type of organization that can provide it. Actually, you can buy, I was looking online and there are monitors that possibly the neighborhood council could purchase that aren't that expensive, but we have to find out if they're really adequate, to do the job. But they would be in the $150 range, so they're not super expensive.
Okay, moving on to Harbor LA Community Plan Update, public hearing on February 8th, City Planning Commission at City Hall. That is a Thursday, and unfortunately, I'm in the grand jury. So if some others can,
Yeah, we need to have, it would be good to have maybe 5 people present at City Hall and then others ready to make public comment through Zoom. And it would be good to have people from districts 1 through 5 able to do that. And then one of us, possibly myself, to be the official neighborhood council speaker, because the neighborhood council gets more time on the agenda. And we would basically be in support of their proposal, but highlighting some of the updates, including the proposed buffers between industrial uses and residential and other sensitive uses. And I think Lou noticed, well, some of the proposals for the Merritt Track and also Athens on the Hill that we would want to highlight and support. And there's all the new environmental justice language in our Harbor Gateway Community Plan that we would want to support orally.
Can we email, for those that are interested, email you, Rosalie?
Yes, we'll try to get that organized.
And then those that want to do public comment, if you can get the link so that we can, our public comments, I appreciate it.
Right. Unfortunately, their agenda only goes out 3 days in advance, but we'll try to start checking if their Zoom link remains the same all the time. And also there is a way for people to send in emailed comments. So we should, and there's a way we could set it up so people could click on a link and more easily just submit their comments that way too.
Okay. Go ahead, Lou. And then Janisha.
Would a council file be in order here? Or is it inappropriate?
Well, we faced this the last time when we were working on our South LA and Southeast LA community plans. They don't put a council file on until it goes to the city council. But we have to figure out, there's some way that it, there is a case number associated with the community plan. So definitely people have to refer to that. And we'll try to start working with the secretary of the City Planning Commission to, figure out the correct identifier for our comments.
Go ahead, Janisha.
Good evening. I was actually going to say the same thing. I believe that you can still even call in or remote in to submit your public comment to the county meeting. But I'm not sure. I haven't tried to see in.
Yes, the City Planning Commission, unlike the City Council, does allow public comment via Zoom. But you need to, the meeting is going to start after 8:30 in the morning. And if you're going to do public comment by Zoom, or if you're down there in person, you need to sign up right at the beginning. And then when they get to the public comment section on the community plan on the agenda, then they will call you by your telephone number, the last 4 digits of your number that show up. So it's kind of a tricky, difficult situation, but so that's why we should also try to get some people to have already submitted individual comment online ahead of the meeting.
Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda. Demolitions at 11840 South Central Avenue. I think that's east. And then 119th Street and tenant evictions.
So we mentioned this at a previous meeting. This is due to the approval of the units on those properties, and it took us a while to figure out exactly where they were. So that it is not the corner of 120th and Central Avenue, the northeast corner as originally thought. That actually is yet another proposed development, apartment development. But nothing has been approved for that yet. And that's the lot where the gentleman who is working on the other lot on Main Street and 116th, just north of the 105 freeway on the west side of Main Street, he also has proposed something there, but they don't seem to be moving forward. So he's the one who has the modular units that he's creating out of containers and selling from the lot at 120th and Central. But this lot is just north of that on 119th. There's an existing 2 sets of 1-story duplexes from the 40s, and the owner, which is Oak Road Capital, the ones that we kept trying to come to our meeting, and they kept saying they weren't ready, and then suddenly we found out that the project had already gotten approval, and it was under the fast tracking too of the affordable housing. So I talked to the 2 of the existing residents. They got the notices at the beginning of December that they are going to be evicted. Actually, they got it in, I think, or only orally. And so they are challenging that. They're through housing department because of their Section 8 status. And they have, under the city's requirements, they either can get I think it's $20,000 relocation amount.
$24,650.
Such an odd amount. Okay. Or they have the right to return to have a unit in the new building once it's built. But the question is how do you manage that? Because you'd have to move out and live somewhere else for a year and a half to 2 years before the new building is ready. So anyway, we provided them with some more information on potential legal aid sources and their rights under this new ordinance, but we haven't really heard anything further from them. So we'll just kind of keep monitoring that. But this is, as far as we know, this is the first new housing that's destroying older affordable housing and creating evictions in our neighborhood council.
Second one. Don't forget mine, Rosalie.
Well, yours is
Yeah.
a little bit different, but
Yeah.
if you want to just briefly describe your situation, because this is another example of
Yeah. New owner comes
housing.
in and removing everyone and remodeling the entire building, including the 2 empty vacant units that were ready to rent. He's decided to renovate all of it. Tore out gates, putting in new gates, but he gave me an unlawful, invalid 90-day notice. And to his surprise, housing department told him, no, well, if you want me to move, file for a no-fault eviction and pay $24,650. All right, moving on. Moving on.
So have you heard anything further since they informed him?
No, No,
No,
he's been nice.
okay.
He's been nice. Let's move on to the next item. 15810 South Vermont Avenue, the small lot homes.
So the, those are the, this project has been going on for probably maybe 8 years now. I think only Lou remembers it from many planning committees ago. And this is Steve Stepakis. He came to us. Originally, he was going to build condominiums on the site. And, but then when he heard about the city's small lot ordinance, he decided to build that way. And it took a long time for him to get all the approvals. I know the city plan, some of the city planning department staff got kind of frustrated with him as he didn't fully seem to understand all of the processes that he had to go through. But finally, after many years, he got final approval, and then he got the demolition notices out because there was a small house on the lot and a commercial building that had to be demolished, and they had remained all that time with questionable uses and a lot of detriment to the neighbors. So I think it's been about 1.5 years for the construction. And one of the issues that we hear about also when we listen in on neighborhood plan check is that once the city planning department finishes with the approval process, then it goes to building and safety department. And they do a lot of their own interpretation, because when he started the construction, it looked different from what he had showed us and described. And originally there were going to be driveways on the north side and the south side of this project. And now there is only one driveway in the very middle, which looks barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass. And I don't know what happens if there's a fire, but I guess the fire truck has to be parked on the street and hope that the water can shoot over the buildings to get to the other side. Anyway, he originally told us they were going to be market rate. And this was, quite a number of years ago. Now I called him recently, and he says that due to the whole issue of banks being very careful about how they fund, probably at least half, if not 2/3, are going to be rentals, and maybe some will be sold. They are, I believe, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. Originally, there was going to be areas for guest parking, and now each unit will have a 3-car garage, and one of those spaces is supposed to be for the guests. So we're just wondering how this is all going to work out and who's going to want to buy a home, with such limited parking. And so we'll see. And they're still not ready to be sold, probably not till April. So we'll keep monitoring that. And because they're 2 stories over the garages, they really, they just tower over the single family homes to their east that are on Ainsworth. And that was something else. Originally, he told us that second row would be set back away from those homes, and then there would be a whole line of trees planted that would, grow tall and hopefully give those residents some privacy, but I don't know that there's even room for that.
Oh, thank you, Rosalie. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, NC Plan Check presentation on processes and procedures.
So Lou, I don't think you were able to attend that meeting. They did record it, so somehow we need to send that out to our, at least our committee, or maybe even post it online. It's the new way that the zoning is gonna look. Like right now for the like the single family home neighborhoods, they're zoned R1. But as Christopher Pena mentioned in his presentation on the Harbor Gateway Community Plan update, our community plan is going to start using that new zoning. And it's like this whole string of letters, which I suppose one day we will get used to, but it just looks very confusing. And for example, where Keith lives in apartments, those are usually zoned R3, but they have a whole new string, and it governs not just the height, but how you know, how much space they can take on the property, and setbacks and everything is all indicated in that code. So I think it's already been approved by the City Planning Commission. I've kind of lost track of where it is, but it does the whole process does improve the notification to residents. I mean, it expands, I think, the period of notification, and also gives a little longer to the appeal process timeline. And I think it gives a little more, like 500 feet or 1,000 feet with notification.
Thanks, Rosalie.
But anyway, it's something, maybe we can schedule a special presentation by the planning department on this, especially since now we're meeting by Zoom, and they, you know, they prefer to attend the meetings virtually.
Okay. Moving on to item H, other planning and land use issues. I had the opportunity to drive by 120th and Figueroa. The gas station is almost finished, and they have a laundromat as well built there too. It's Sinclair. It does brighten up the actual corner. It looks better than what it used to look like as far as with that recycling place. Go ahead, Rosalie.
No, I agree. That one, we were kind of curious why that gas station seemed to move along a lot faster than the Arco, but
I think Arco did a lot more.
right, well, we're not quite sure, but actually, but the gas station still is not ready to open at the Sinclair, so.
Mm.
And we don't have a contact, I don't believe, for finding out more. Maybe we'll look into that just to see, get an idea.
Are there any other planning and land use issues? Okay, moving on. Are there any announcements? All right, our next meeting is February 22nd via Zoom. We are adjourned at 8:06. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.